Hello, Eights. This is Mr.Westra here with Half Brother Reading 31, Part 1. Just to give you a sense of where we've been over the last reading. So, Sarah and Ben arrived home in Victoria with Zan. Jack Helson found out that Zan was there and is expecting Peter to bring Zan home later in the week. But Richard calls Dr. Helson and they arrange for Richard to buy Zan back, and they settled on $20,000 for him to have Zan again. And the idea is that they will donate Zan to a sanctuary where Zan can be safe. So here we go. The next morning, Peter got in touch with William Eckler, and he agreed to help us out. The rest was up to us. Well, to me, really. It started out well. I called the local reporter and told him my story over the phone. He came out to the house and talked to me and Peter, and a photographer snapped us all playing happily with Zan. When they ran the article 2 days later, they included the address and phone number where donations could be made. The next day, CTV and CBC sent camera crews out to do a story, and 3 local radio stations wanted me to come in and talk about Zan and why I wanted him back and why I was afraid he might come to harm. I never mentioned Jack Helson by name, or the university, or the names of the labs. I tried to keep what I said as general as I could. Donations started coming in. In 3 days, we had 2,000. Some of Dad's old students came back for free to help us look after Zan. In 5 days, we had 4,000. Dad went and sold the Mercedes and drove home in a used Toyota. They say they last forever, he said. Sometimes envelopes just came through the mail slot. A $10 bill from Tim Borden. I'd always known he had a good heart. 50 from a local school for the deaf, whose students had once visited and signed with Zan. One day I was in the kitchen when I heard the mail slot clunk. When I opened the unmarked envelope, there was $30 in cash and a handwritten note saying, "For Zan, from Jennifer." I opened the door and saw her in a station wagon as it pulled out of the driveway, driven by Big Hairy Cal. We just had time to wave before the car turned the corner. The next day, Shannon and her mother drove by to make a donation too. While Shannon's mom talked to mine, I took Shannon out back to introduce her to Zan, who was with a couple of the student volunteers. Luckily, Zan seemed to like Shannon right away, and her expression was sheer delight as Zan hugged and tickled her. Then we went back inside and talked a bit in the kitchen. Before long, her mother called out from the living room, and it was time to go. "Thanks, Shannon," I said, and I kissed her on the mouth. She looked happy, and I felt a surge of something between us that made me think, chemistry. The donations kept coming. After 8 days, William Eckler called and told us we had 10,000. And the story kept spreading. It had already been covered in a couple of the big Canadian papers, and then the Associated Press did a story that got picked up all across the United States. On the day before Helson's deadline, we'd raised $12,000 and only had to use 8,000 of our own. Tomorrow we'd wire the money to Jack Helson, and Zan would be ours. Peter and I were inside with a couple of the other students, signing and playing with Zan. I felt great. 10 days ago, everything had seemed so desperate, but we'd done it. Around 3 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I went around to see who it was. It was Dad, home early. The moment he stepped out of the car, I knew something was wrong. He looked gray. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Let's go inside," he said. In the living room with Mum and Peter, he told us, "Helson's not selling. He wants Zan back. He saw a piece in the paper implying he was planning to sell Zan to a lab, so he's just issued a statement to the press saying he never had any such intention. He claims he wants to continue his language studies with Zan and other chimps. He said his chimp was stolen by its former owner, and he's suing us for defamation. He wants Zan on a plane with Peter by Sunday, or he'll pursue all his legal options." He nodded at Mum, "including press his charges against you for theft." "What can we do?" I asked. "Nothing," said Dad. "Zan has to go back." Chapter 25, Jungle. I'd never been camping in my life, and I had no idea what I was doing. I filled a knapsack with food cans and a can opener, some plastic cutlery in a cup, a thermos with water, extra clothes, Zan's blanket, and a few of his toys. I had $300 in cash. I wished I knew how to drive. Not that it would have done me any good, Mom and Dad were out with the car getting tranquilizer drugs for Zan. Peter was at the radio station doing another interview, trying to set the record straight about Jack Helson and Zan and all the accusations and charges flying around. In 4 hours, Zan was going to board a plane that would take him back to Helson's ranch. "Come out, play," I signed to Zan. I think he was surprised I was leading him to the front door instead of the back. Outside, he walked to the garage. I climbed on my bike, slung the knapsack over my shoulders, and then held out my arms. Zan hooted with excitement and jumped up onto my lap. His long arms went all the way around my back, underneath the knapsack. I pedaled hard, out onto West Saanich Road, towards Beaver Lake. It was a crummy plan, and I knew it, but I had no other. Beaver Lake became Elk Lake, and all along the western shore was parkland. There were paths and picnic areas in some of it, but mostly it was pretty dense forest. That was where I was taking us. I could not take him back to Africa, but I could take him into a forest on the outskirts of Victoria, and maybe he'd be safe there, for a while anyway. It was a weekday around 2 o'clock, and the roads were almost deserted. We only passed a few cars. I hoped no one would notice Zan, clinging and hooting and panting. I'd been a bit nervous he'd try to jump off, but if anything, he held too tight, afraid maybe, because he'd never been on my bike before. I was worrying about the entrance to the park, where the cars came in and out. That was where we were most likely to be seen. Get past that bit, and I could veer out onto one of the forest paths. In 15 minutes, we were at the entrance. No cars in sight. But coming towards us was another bicycle, and on that was Tim Borden. I tried to pretend I didn't see him coming, but he called out, "Ben!" And then again, "Hey, Ben, is that Zan?" He turned and was following me, and I knew it was no good. I rode a ways into the trees before I stopped, just so no one else would see us. "What are you doing?" Tim asked. "Just taking Zan out for a ride," I lied. "I heard about what's going on, about him having to go back." "Yeah, thanks for the money you sent. You'll get it back." He shrugged like he didn't care. He looked at my bulging knapsack. "You're running away," he said. "Yep." "Into the forest?" I sighed. That was the idea. He nodded. Zan hooted pleasantly at him, and Tim hooted back. They'd always seemed to like each other. Zan hopped off my bike and climbed onto Tim. Tim giggled. "Man, he's getting strong, huh?" "Stronger than us, and he's only 2. "I know a place," said Tim, "deep in. There's even a creek so you could get fresh water." I looked at him hard, wondering if I could trust him, and knew I could. "Show me?" I said. We cycled until the path disappeared, then dismounted and walked our bikes. Zan stayed close to me, sometimes on my back, sometimes at my side, but never straying far. He'd never been among so many trees before, and I think it freaked him out. There were all kinds, pines and oaks and chestnuts. Mostly I didn't know their names. I caught Zan, from the corner of my eye, signing to himself. Tree, bird, listen, bird, big tree, water, water. We'd reached the little creek. "Thanks, Tim. No one comes here." "You got food?" "Not much, enough for a day or 2. I had this idea that when food ran out, I could sneak off to the concession stands near the beach and buy burgers and fries until my money ran out. "I can bring you guys food and stuff," Tim said. "Really?" "Yeah. Here, I've got money." I pulled some bills from my pocket and handed them to him. "Just tell me what you need and I'll bring it to you here." "We might move around a bit," I said. "Well, if you're not here, I'll just hang it up." He looked around. "On that tree over there." "Okay," I said. "Tim, you won't tell anyone, right? Not even my parents, okay?" "No way," he said. "This is cool. You're doing the coolest thing. So I'll see you tomorrow." He stuck out his hand and we shook, and then he was off. It suddenly felt like real wilderness. I couldn't hear people or cars or anything. Zan seemed content, as long as I wasn't more than 20 feet away. He would swing from trees and collect broken boughs and make them into a big nest. Then he'd get bored with that and start on another nest. It was warm, and the light was coming through the branches, dappled everything and made it beautiful. I felt hopeful. We could live here forever. We had each other. As long as we stayed warm and had food, why not?